Hello and welcome to the Diction Police by the Book, our webinar series on lyric diction. I'm your host, Ellen Rissinger, an American vocal coach accompanist currently on the music staff of the Semperoper in Dresden, Germany. And my partner in crime today is vocal coach Dr. François Germain, a native French and German speaker who grew up in Aix-en-Provence and studied French diction with Rosemarie Landry. François is assistant professor at the Crane School of Music at SUNY Potsdam and also teaches lyric diction at the University of Ottawa. Thanks for joining us, François.
Hi, Ellen. Happy to be back again, this time to discuss consonants and everyone's favorite subject in French, liaison.
Today is our third lesson on French diction, and we have a whole lot of information to cover. So rather than answering questions at the end of this episode, if you have any questions, write them in the comments section of the Hangout, or feel free to contact us through the Facebook page or our website, www.dictionpolice.com, and we'll do our best to incorporate the answers into the fourth and final episode on Saturday. As we started working on this episode, I remember thinking that there can't be enough information to fill an entire hour on consonants. But the more we started piecing this together, the more we realized what needed to be said.
Yes, that's true. And we spent the first two episodes going over the vowel sounds in French. And I made the point several times that French is very vowel-oriented and not consonant-driven like German and English can be, or even Italian in some cases when you think about double consonants.
But there are a lot of rules that govern these consonants. So what are the basics that we need to know before we get going here? Are there some general rules that we should follow?
Well, beyond all the intricacies of spelling rules, the most important thing to remember is that consonants should be light, crisp, and late, because we always strive to sing on the vowel sound for as long as we can, without being like musically, obviously, but also without anticipating the next syllable or consonant. I think another good thing to remember, especially for English and German speakers, is that consonants should generally be Italianate in character. For instance, T's and D's have to be dental, T and D, instead of T and D. But we'll explain this in more details as we go through them, I think.
Exactly. I guess the easiest thing to do is just go through the consonants in alphabetical order. So our first one would, of course, be B.
Great. So a lot of the time, what we'll notice is that the treatment of a consonant will depend on its placement in a word. B, in most cases, will be pronounced B, as in English. And here I have an example from Poulenc's Le Chaboté, Ba-be-bi bobu, rather. So ba-be-bi bobu bé, le chat a mis ses bottes. But if B happens in the context of a nasal vowel at the end of a word, it will be silent in most cases, in a word like plomb. Et dont soudain un plomb sanglant. This is from La Muse Populaire by Meyerbeer, and you notice the B at the end of plomb is not pronounced at all. And there is one more possibility with B. If it is followed by an unvoiced consonant, it will be unvoiced to a P, like in the word absence.
Almost like the German idea of Auslautverhärtung, where the final consonant of a word becomes unvoiced.
Yes, it's similar, except that in French it's not because it's at the end of a word, but rather because if it's followed by an unvoiced consonant. And this is from Absence, from Les Nuits d'été by Berlioz. Ô sort amer, ô dure absence, where you have a P instead of the B.
The next letter is C, and there are a few more rules that govern this one.
There are a few possibilities for C. C can be pronounced K, and with that sound, you have to make sure that you not have too much air escaping in it. That's what we were talking about already with the Italianate concept of most consonants. So it's really K and not K, like it would be maybe in German or English sometimes. So it will be pronounced K at the beginning or in the middle of a word when it is followed by the letters A, O, U, or by a consonant. And it will also be pronounced K when it's at the end of a word in most cases. Au calme clair de lune, triste et beau, This is from Clair de Lune by Debussy. And from Connais-tu le pays, from Mignon by Thomas. Et le lac transparent où glisse sur les eaux. And you notice that that final C in lac is pronounced K.
Exactly.
Now, another possibility for C is that it could be pronounced S, the phonetic S. So at the beginning or in the middle of a word, if the letter C is followed by E or I, or when it has that little thing under it, that little hook that we call a CD in French. Here we have Le cœur cède à l'amour from Juliet's Waltz, where you can see both the K version of the C letter and the S version of it. Cœur cède. And here, cependant, l'excellent docteur Boulonnais cueille avec lenteur des simples, where again you have a combination of both the K sound and the S sound for the letter C.
And in this example, we can see in the word cueille that the U hardens the C to a K. But if there were no U there, it would be the phonetic S the way it is in cependant.
Exactly.
And we don't really see this C cedilla very often, do we?
No, not very often, but it's in my name, for instance. So it's François and not Francois. And I also have it here in Roméo et Juliette by Gounod. Celui-là se rit des blessures qui n'ont reçu jamais, where reçu is pronounced with that S and not a K sound, even though it's followed by the U, because of that CD. Now, finally, the final possibility for C is that it can actually be also silent. So generally that happens when it is final after a nasal vowel. But note that there are exceptions to this. For instance, if you think of the composer Poulenc, that C will be pronounced K even though it's after a final nasal vowel. And then there's also the sort of the complicated case of the word donc in French, where C will be pronounced K when donc starts the clause or is followed by a vowel, but it will be silent at the end of a clause or when it's followed by a consonant. So let's look at examples maybe to explain this. From Villanelle by Berlioz, viens donc sur ce banc de mousse. So we've noticed those two silent final C's here. And just to explain the donc in this case, it's followed by a consonant in the middle of a clause, so you don't pronounce it. And here from Les Contes d'Hoffmann, ta maîtresse est donc un trésor, where the K sound is pronounced because the donc is followed by a vowel sound, un, donc un. And maybe most famously from Carmen by Bizet, frappe-moi donc, where the K or the C is silent because the donc is at the end of the clause.
Exactly, and that is one of the big places that we listen for it.
Absolutely, that's when you know if you're doing this right in this example.
The C is often seen in combination with H as the digraph CH.
Yes, here we have two possibilities. It can be the sound esh, sh, and that is by far the most common spelling in French for that sound, sh. But it can also be pronounced K in a few words of Greek origin. So from Clair de Lune by Fauré, votre âme est un paysage choisi, que vont charmants masques et bergamasques, where you have two nice cases of that esh sound. And here from Cette extase by Debussy, le cœur des petites voix, where that CH is actually the K sound because cœur is a word of Greek origin.
Let's move on to the letter D.
The first thing to know about D is that just as in Italian, there should be absolutely no aspiration. So again, this is that Italianate concept. It needs to be very light and dental. D, not d. D can be pronounced D when it's at the beginning or in the middle of a word, as we will see here. This is Chanson triste by Duparc. Dans ton cœur dort un clair de lune. Just straightforward cases of the D sound, also in the name of the composer, Duparc.
Exactly, and we see the C is pronounced at the end of his name too.
Yes, Duparc, kind of like we had with lac earlier.
Exactly.
At the end of a word, D will generally be silent, except if you're dealing with a proper name. And the example here is Massenet's opera, Le Cid. And it's not Le Ci, but Le Cid. Now here from Villanelle by Berlioz, D sévère au rebord du nid, where we have two cases of silent Ds at the end of rebord and nid.
What about the letter F?
Well, F is pretty straightforward in its pronunciation, just as in English, it's F, but there are some special cases for it. So at the beginning or in the middle of a word, it is pronounced F, just straightforward. But at the end of a word, it is usually pronounced, but it can also sometimes be silent, which is always a big theme in French, silent letters. In the word for key, clé, for instance. So from Au cimetière by Berlioz, où flotte avec un son plaintif l'ombre d'un if, un air maladivement tendre, à la fois charmant et fatal, qui vous fait mal. Lots of Fs in here.
Exactly, and we're not really lingering on it, right? We're not trying to go flot. We're not trying to do the alliteration thing, for example, right?
No, we don't go for the effect of the consonant in French, like we might want to do in German sometimes to do a little bit of word painting. Mm-hmm. That's really not a French concept. The fact that the alliteration is there is going to be enough. That's all we need to actually have this sort of repeated sound. We don't need to linger on that.
Okay.
Maybe a few special words to mention here. Œuf and bœuf, so the words for egg and beef, are peculiar in French because it's the F is pronounced when the words are in the singular, but it actually becomes silent in the plural, and the vowel also changes and closes to an O slash. So from œuf, bœuf, we go to bœuf, like in the expression la poule aux œufs d'or, and not la poule aux œufs d'or. And that always, that's one of the things that will betray a foreign speaker in French sometimes if they say œuf, des œufs in the plural. It should be silent.
And just to translate the la poule aux œufs d'or, oh God, I just butchered that, is the chicken that lays the golden egg, right?
That's correct, yes. And the other special case is with the number 9 in French, neuf. Again, it's pronounced neuf unless it's followed by, or in those two phrases here, when you say 9 years or 9 hours, it turns into a V, 9 ans and 9 heures.
And I've heard this before about the 9 o'clock and the 9 years, but the good thing is that these phrases very rarely come up in art song or opera, right?
Yeah, we tend to not give time too much in art song.
The letter G has a lot in common with the pronunciation rules for the letter C, right?
Yes, and so we have similar things to discuss here. So at the beginning or in the middle of a word, G can be either the hard G sound when it is followed by the letters A, O, or U, or it can be the soft J sound when it's followed by the letters E or I. Now, when you see the combination G-U followed by another vowel, the U is only there to harden the G letter to a G sound. Similarly, when you see the G-E combination followed by a vowel, the E is only there to soften the G to the J sound. And both the U and the E in that case don't have phonetic values of their own. They're just there to affect the G letter. So we can look at examples of this. From En sourdine by Debussy, parmi les vagues longueurs, where that GU turns the G letter into a G, even though it's followed by the letter E afterwards. And if we did not have that U there, we would have vage and longeur instead of vague longueur. And the reverse example is the next one from L'Étoile by Chabrier, nous voyageons incognito, where the E after the G just softens the G letter to the J sound, even though it's followed by O. So it's voyageons and not voyagons in this case. Another example of our G letter from Avant de quitter ces lieux by Gounod, daigne de tout danger la protéger, where we have straightforward cases of the G letter followed by the letter E. And in this case, it's also the soft J sound.
And this is similar to the Italian rules for the hard and soft C and G too. The only thing that's different is the soft sound that gets made. In Italian, an I or an E after C or G would make it ch, as in ciao, or j, as in giorno. And just like you said with the French, it wouldn't have any phonetic value of its own. And an H in Italian makes it hard instead of the U. But in French, the soft consonants become a phonetic S or j.
That's exactly right. Now, moving on, a final G is usually found after nasal vowels, and if that's the case, it will usually be silent. From Sanglot by Poulenc, de ce cœur il coulait du sang, where we have a G after a final nasal vowel, and therefore it's silent.
G also functions in combination with N, which we just saw a moment ago in the word degno.
Yes, and this is also basically the same as in Italian. It will be that ñ sound with the little hook on the N in most cases. One good word to know for poetry and art song is the word for nightingale, because it tends to come back a lot.
In every language.
Rossignol, with that ñ sound. This is from C by Poulenc, et des cygnes dans les fossés. Again, with that ñ sound because of the GN combo.
And since we've been comparing this to Italian, one thing to remember is in Italian, the ñ is always a doubled sound. But in French, again, we don't want a double sound. So it's not cygne, right?
That's correct. Just a single ñ in there, cygne, as you can see in the IPA transcription.
Yeah. Even though we don't pronounce it, the letter H has two forms in French.
Well, maybe first I'll say that French is generally silent, but you will sometimes hear French singers pronounce the H slightly for emphasis, especially with emotionally charged words like haine and honte, and you'll hear them sing them haine and honte, just very slightly. But that's a really rare case, and generally the H should be silent, so just remember that maybe. The big question about the H is whether it is what we call aspirate or unaspirate. All that means is that an aspirate H won't trigger the liaison, whereas an unaspirate H will trigger the liaison, and we'll talk about this in a little bit more detail when we actually look at liaison. But here is nonetheless.
So it doesn't mean. So yeah, so aspirate H doesn't mean that we need a puff of air.
That's correct. It's completely silent. It only has an impact on how we deal with liaison when we have H words. So from l'échelonnement des haies by Debussy, l'échelonnement des haies. And the word haie, the word for hedges in French, happens to be an aspirate H, and therefore we're not allowed to do the liaison after des. It's not des haies, but des. However, this is the opposite example. From La vie antérieure bas du parc, j'ai longtemps habité sous de vastes portiques, where habité has an unaspirate H, and therefore the liaison is allowed. J'ai longtemps habité.
And there's not always any rhyme or reason behind when the H is aspirate or unaspirate. My favorite example of this is the word for hero, because the masculine noun hero is aspirate, and the feminine noun for heroine is unaspirate.
Yes, so this is why French is so much fun, right? This is from Meyerbeer, Je suis enfant de la montagne, comme un héros ou comme un roi, where, as you described, the word héros is an aspirate H, and again, we're not allowed to do the liaison with the article that precedes. It's not comme un héros, it's comme un héros.
Exactly. And one good thing about dictionaries is that most French dictionaries will have either an asterisk in front of the entire entry, in front of the word itself, or they will put an asterisk in front of the IPA transcription actually in the entry, so you can tell when it's aspirate. The asterisk indicates that it's an aspirate H.
That's correct. And if that makes everyone feel better, I can tell you that even French people have to look this up a lot.
That does make me feel better. We do see a lot of the letter J in French.
Yes, and mostly because that's the letter we have in the pronoun je, the pronoun for I. So it's pretty ubiquitous. The good thing about that letter is that it will always be pronounced je. And this is one of the very simple cases in French. You don't have to worry about it too much. Here we have from Chanson Adulcinée by Ibert, Un an me dure la journée, where that initial J letter is pronounced je, a journée.
So wait, we do have one consonant now. We have one letter that we know that every time we see it will be pronounced and will be pronounced the same way.
That's one so far, and I believe there will be another one shortly.
Well, that makes life easier.
Yes.
Does K even come up in French? Because I think I've only ever seen it in the word ski.
K is actually very rare in French and usually borrowed from foreign words. It is, however, always pronounced K, so that's also kind of useful. But you will pretty much never have to use it. The words that come to mind are ski, like you said, koala, kangaroo, and you can tell why it's not so frequent in poetry. The K sound is really usually handled with the letter C in French, or the QU combination. So we'll get to that soon.
And that leads us to the L, which in French should again be the Italianate tip of the tongue L.
Yes, again, we have to keep this consonant light and crisp. And this can actually be tricky for English and Russian speakers, particularly, who tend to articulate the L further back and a little bit thicker. I think L is also one of the consonants that tends to be anticipated the most, which ends up distorting the preceding vowel. So we always have to avoid that. And if you just keep it light and crisp, that's much less likely to happen. In most cases, the letter L is pretty straightforward and pronounced L, even at the end of the word, as we saw earlier in our discussion of F in the words fatal and mal. And we can see some here from Juliet's Waltz again by Gounod. Et respirer la rose avant de l'effeuiller. We have those two L's, la and l'effeuiller.
And as we can see from this example, we do have cases where a written letter L is not pronounced as a phonetic L.
Yes, the combination IL after a vowel at the end of a word, or ILL in the middle of a word, will be pronounced with a J glide, except in 3 words that you might want to learn right away: mille, ville, and tranquille. But every other time when you see that ILL combo, you'll have to use a J glide in there. One important note, the preceding vowel does not change because of the I in that ILL, meaning that I will not function with the preceding vowel, it will function with the LL. Let's look at this case here. From Avant de quitter ces lieux by Gounod, Ô sainte médaille, and then further down the piece, Au jour de la bataille. And you notice the ILL turning into the J glide, but also the fact that the A letter retains its bright A quality and doesn't function with the I to form an open A or a closed A.
I was just going to say, because when we see the AI together, the tendency is then to say some form of an E.
Yes, so this is not médaille or bataille, but it's really médaille and bataille. And same thing in this one from L'Île Inconnue by Berlioz, le gouvernail d'Orphin, and not le gouvernail d'Orphin. And finally, we do have some words for L where a final L will be silent. The one that comes to mind is the word for nice, which is gentil in French, and the L is silent here.
Our next 2 consonants are the ones that can trigger the nasal vowels. So we'll start with letter M.
M will be either pronounced M or silent when it's in the context of a nasal vowel. And you can refer to our previous discussion, or previous episode rather, for a detailed discussion of nasal vowels. And here I have from Dans l'herbe by Poulenc, Mais comme j'étais loin de lui, just straightforward M sound. This should be fairly easy for everybody. But you also have to know that M can sometimes be silent, not only in nasal vowels context, but also in the combination MN. In a word like damnation, for instance. But that's not always going to be the case when you see MN. And the word here is hymne, where you pronounce both the M and the N. And I'm only bringing this up because these are words that actually happen in our repertoire, and you might want to know them.
Absolutely, and especially damnation, damnation. I want to be sure and mention this because the M also doesn't create a nasal vowel. It's literally just silent.
Correct. It's not damnation, it's really damnation.
What about the letter N?
So N functions in a similar way to M. It will be pronounced N, unless it spells out a nasal vowel. From Nani by Chausson, Nani ne reviendra jamais, where you have both cases of the N being pronounced and the N being silent because it's in the nasal vowel open, in reviendra.
Exactly, and we have a couple of places with a double N and a double M here. We're not trying to double these consonants, right? We're not saying comme or a nani, noni, nani. We're not trying to double these middle consonants. We want to just have them single, right?
That's absolutely right, and that's maybe one good point to make since we've been talking about Italian consonants so much. We want to make sure that we don't do this sort of Italian thing of doubling consonants when we see them. In French, consonants are always single. In this case, you can see that in the IPA transcription. There's only one N there, and that's how you should sing it. Na, ni, ne, and not na, ni, ne.
The P in French, like all of the Romance languages, shouldn't be aspirated, right?
Yes, again, that's our big topic today, Italian consonants. So you have to be careful with P to not put too much air in it. It should really be pronounced, in French we say du bout des lèvres, from the tip of the lips. So there's really very little air escaping when you do a P, almost no explosion at all. Now, it is usually pronounced P, and it will also generally be silent when you see it at the end of a word. Here we have the adverb trop, which makes the P become silent because it's at the end. This is an example from Chausson. I realize I forgot to put the composer here. So this is from Les Papillons by Chausson. Les Papillons couleur de neige, where we have two nice, crisp, not overly airy P sounds. Papillon. Now, when P is followed by a T, it can be silent. In the words here we have set or compter, but it's not always the case. If you think of the word for September, we pronounce that septembre in French, which is kind of odd because it's the same root as set, but one is silent and the other one will be pronounced. So again, French is a lot of fun.
Exactly. Well, and compter, I think, is one to always memorize because I see this come up in almost every opera I've done. At least one time this verb comes up.
Yeah, that's a good one to know.
Yeah. In most languages, we see Q followed by U, but in French, we can also see it alone at the end of a word.
Yes, the letter Q functions mostly with U in French as well, unless it's final. And it will almost always be pronounced K. One word to watch for is the word for 5 in French, cinq, where you have one of an example of a Q that's not followed by a U and still pronounced K. But it's pronounced K when cinq is on its own or followed by a vowel. But if it's followed by a consonant, it actually becomes silent, like in the expression here, cinq femmes, 5 women. Not cinq femmes. You have to be careful with that.
Yeah, the numbers seem to have their own rules when it comes to the final consonants and whether they're pronounced or not.
Numbers have a lot of little funky things that can happen to them. So I think we'll cover them in our next episode in more detail. Here we have from Spleen by Debussy, Je crains toujours ce qu'est d'attendre quelque fuite atroce de vous. We have 3 nice cases of the QU pronounced K. And again, as we talked about when we were talked about C, make sure that K sound does not have too much air. Not quelque, but quelque.
Exactly, and also that the U does not have its own phonetic identity. There's no glide. It's not like Italian where we would say qualche.
Exactly, the U is only there in combination with the Q. So a little bit like the case of the G followed by the U that we saw earlier.
Yeah. This leads us to the discussion probably the most fraught with questions and controversy, the French R.
Yes, so the R is definitely a source of debate. Let me start by saying that there are two main ways to pronounce the R in French, what we call the uvular R and the flipped R. And I like to right away eliminate the possibility of a rolled R in French, because we really should not use a rolled R in singing. You hear sometimes from some opera singers, you will hear that rolled R, especially in opera, but I find that it makes the language sound somewhat affected and definitely too Italian. Now, the uvular R is the one that we associate the most with spoken French. Although I also say that there are many French-speaking areas in France and around the world where they don't use the uvular R, and you will actually hear the flipped R very commonly. Traditionally, the flipped R is the one that has been used in lyric diction, and I think that's the one that I would like to recommend to this day. There is a modern tendency by Francophone singers particularly to use the uvular R in singing in an attempt to make the language sound a little bit more modern. But I think it is better to start with the flipped R and not attempt the uvular until you are very familiar with the language and really able to pronounce it without creating any tension.
And one thing I've noticed living here in Germany, when Germans sing in French and try to use the uvular R, they do have a uvular R in their language, but it's trilled, it's actually rolled. So when they try to sing the French R, then it comes out too long and too thick as well.
Yes, so for our discussion, let's just say that we're going to stick to the flipped R, and I personally believe that it's preferable in most cases. So here we have "Oh le frêle et frais murmure" from Cette Extase by Debussy. We have a bunch of R's in a row, and you can see how if you were to roll this, for instance, "Oh le frêle et frais murmure," it would become way too much, and it wouldn't really sound French anymore. And the flipped R is the one that really allows you to move smoothly from one sound to the next. "Oh le frêle et frais murmure," in a very elegant way.
Yeah, it keeps you all in the front of your mouth that way.
Exactly, it keeps everything at the tip of the tongue, which has been our sort of our big theme going through all these consonants anyway. Now, at the end of a word, the R letter can be pronounced in words like pour, cœur, amer, but it can also be silent, notably in the ER ending of verbs in the infinitive, like the verb aimer, to love, and also in some words. And an important word is baiser, the word for kiss, where the R is silent in both cases.
And the letter R can be found at the ends of words with the spellings RS, RD, and RT.
Yes, and generally in these cases we will pronounce the R, but not the last consonant in the word, as we can see here from Absence by Berlioz, "Au sort amer," where the T is completely silent and it's the R that we end up pronouncing.
And I really want to make the point here that this is not liaison. In many cases, people will ask me if I make the liaison here, but there is no liaison because we actually have a consonant at the end of the word that's pronounced.
That's correct. So in order for us to have a liaison, we would have to have no consonant at all in the word itself. But that's not the case here because the word is sor with the pronounced R.
Exactly. So thankfully, there's a lot less controversy surrounding the letter S, but there are still a few rules that we need to know.
Yes, there are three main possibilities with S. When S is initial or between a vowel and a consonant, it will be pronounced S. So it's the unvoiced version of the letter. When S is intervocalic, meaning between two vowels, it will be pronounced Z. So it's the voiced version of the letter. And when we have a final S, it can be either unvoiced, so S, or silent. From Les Berceaux by Fauré, "Je sens au clair soleil du souvenir vainqueur." And you see cases of initial S's, pronounced S, and a final S in sens, that's silent in this case. And here from Clair de Lune by Debussy, "Et sangloté d'extase les jets d'eau," where we have three cases, an initial S pronounced S, an intervocalic S pronounced Z in extase, and a silent S after the article le and after the word je, léger, where you don't pronounce the S in both. Now, of course, there are exceptional cases because it would be too easy. And a good one to know is this one, where the intervocalic S is actually pronounced S and not Z, like it should be technically. Cela gazouille et susurre.
Now, we've been making a big deal about Italianate consonants. So as we get to the T, I'm going to ask, is the T in French dental?
Yes, it is. It's one of those consonants that has to really remain Italianate with no aspiration, very dental and really articulated at the tip of the tongue. Da, 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 and not ta, ta, ta. It is generally pronounced ta, except at the end of a word where it will be mostly silent. And one little thing to mention is the combination TI followed by a vowel, which can be pronounced SJ glide, but not always. So here we have the words nation and Vénitienne, where you see that TI followed by O and E, that turns into the SJ glide. But words that look very similar, question and antienne, where that same TI will actually be pronounced TJ glide and not SJ glide. So you might want to look them up if you're not sure. Here from C'est l'extase by Debussy, we have examples of T. C'est la nôtre, n'est-ce pas? La mienne dit et la tienne, dont s'exhale l'humble antienne. We have both silent T's and pronounced T's.
What about the letter V?
V is, again, I think that's our second or third straightforward letter consonant so far. It will be always pronounced V.
And this doesn't really exist at the ends of words, so we really don't have to worry. We just, every time see a V, we say a V, and we have two letters, J and V, that we can actually be absolutely sure of.
That's correct. And here we have Juliet's Waltz again. Je veux vivre dans le rêve qui m'enivre. And all these V's are straightforward, pronounced as in English, with no strange things happening to them.
W doesn't exist in French, right?
Well, it's mostly, you'll mostly find it in foreign words, but it is very rare. It can come up though, and it will be pronounced V in most cases, as in, for instance, the title of the piece, Fagne de Wallonie by Poulenc, where you do see a W and you have to know what to do with it.
And we're getting close to the end now. We're on X. Yes,
so at the end of a word, X is mostly silent. When followed by a consonant, it will be the unvoiced KS sound. But when followed by a vowel, it can be KS or the voiced version of that, GZ. And that's something you probably have to look up until you know the words well. From C'est l'extase by Debussy, c'est l'extase langoureuse, cela ressemble au cri doux, and dont s'exhale l'humble antienne, where we have our three possibilities for the X letter. Now, at the end of the word, there can be sometimes exceptions too. I said it was mostly silent, but an important one to note is Les Filles de Cadix by Delibes, where the X at the end of Cadix is not silent, it's actually pronounced KS.
And we're finally at the letter Z.
Z is pronounced Z, unless it is silent, which happens at the end of all second-person plural verb forms, and in a few words as well. So from Danse macabre by Saint-Saëns, zig et zag, la mort en cadence. But here from Au cimetière by Berlioz, connaissez-vous la blanche tombe, where we have a verb conjugated in the second person of the plural, and you see that Z, and it's always going to be silent in those verbs.
But in the name of the composer,
oh yes, Berlioz, it is pronounced.
Now, as we've gone through the alphabet, we've talked a little bit about double consonants and the fact that we don't want to lengthen them the way we do in other languages, but there are a few cases where double consonants have their own rules.
Exactly. So in general, we don't double consonants as we do in Italian or even in German in some cases. But sometimes a double consonant will create a totally different sound for the consonant itself. So maybe we can go over the cases where that happens quickly. When you see a double C followed by I or E, it'll be pronounced KS, like the word accepter. If you see a double G followed by I or E, it will be pronounced je, as suggéré. If you see a double L, in 99.9% of cases, it's going to be a single L sound. And remember, it's dental and light. But it can be sometime lengthened, and especially in this word here, illustre, where you can just do a little bit more L.
Yeah, and that one comes up in one of the Don Quixote songs.
That's correct. And these, yeah, we're mentioning these words here because they do happen in the repertoire.
Yeah.
Same idea with the double M. It can sometimes be lengthened just slightly. In the word immense, it can be expressive to just paint the word for immense by lengthening that M. Double R can also sometimes be lengthened, especially when it indicates a different tense in French. Here we have accourait, and seeing the double R here means that it's the conditional tense. If I only had one R, it would be the imperfect tense. So just for clarity, sometimes it can be important to actually make that little distinction. And when you see a double S, it will always be pronounced S, unvoiced, even if you have vowels on either end. Always S when you see the double S. Now, all other consonants remain the same when they are doubled, meaning that you don't do anything to them, you don't lengthen them, you don't double them.
Okay, I know that that's a lot of information, but we still have more to go. And one of the broadest topics in French diction is liaison. But before we get into the rules for it, there are two words that we need to define: liaison and elision, elision.
Absolutely. There is always a little confusion between the two words, but they describe two different processes, so it's important to know which is which. A liaison is the process by which a silent consonant becomes pronounced in some cases when the next word starts with a vowel or an unaspirate H. An elision, or an elision, is the process by which a final schwa is dropped or elided when the next word starts with a vowel. So let's look at examples to make this a little bit clearer. Here we have two examples of liaison. Dans un sommeil que charmait ton image, where the silent S in dans becomes pronounced because it's followed by a vowel, dans un. And same thing, the silent N ton is pronounced because it's followed by the I letter, ton image. An elision, however, would look like this. This is from Nel by Forêt. Que ta perle est douce au ciel enflammé. And I don't pronounce those final schwas in perle and douce. It's not que ta perle est douce au ciel enflammé. We just drop those schwas, so we elide them, so that the whole sentence flows a little bit better. Que ta perle est douce au ciel enflammé. And that's elision. So it's really different. The elision is we're taking a sound away, whereas a liaison we're actually adding a sound in some way.
Exactly. You said that liaison is when a silent consonant at the end of the word gets pronounced because it's followed by a vowel at the beginning of the next word. But we don't want to make liaison every single time that the next word starts with a vowel.
That's right, and that's the main difficulty with liaison. You don't make them all the time, and there are many rules that govern the proper use of liaison. These rules actually fall within three big categories. You have three different kinds of liaison. You have mandatory liaison that you have to make no matter what. You have cases where the liaison is absolutely forbidden and you won't make it. And you have cases where the liaison is optional, which I think is that last category that makes the whole topic really tricky, because how do you decide whether you will make the liaison or not?
Well, and especially for us as foreigners, I mean, diction experts always talk about le bon goût, the good taste of a native speaker when it comes to liaison. But how can we develop this bon goût as a non-native speaker?
I love this concept of bon goût. A good knowledge of the language is essential, because grammar plays a huge role in when to make a liaison. And even among French speakers, I'll say that there are differences and discrepancies, because in the spoken language, we don't use liaison as much as we do in lyric diction. So I recommend arming yourself with a very good reference book and constantly checking your rules, and also listening to great French singers to see what they do. And you'll find that different singers do different things, and that's how you will sort of build your own ear for liaison, and when it is bon goût and when it's not bon goût.
Before we list too many rules, we should also talk about the different pronunciations that letters can take in liaison.
Yes, so some letters will actually remain the same in liaison. So N, R, P, T, Z will be pronounced the same in the context of the liaison. But some letters will change their pronunciation. The D becomes T, the G becomes K, the S becomes Z, and the X also becomes Z. And there are also cases where the vowel preceding the liaison will change. In the adverb trop, for instance, in the context of the liaison, that closed O will be open to an open O, from trop to trop. And some nasal vowels will lose the nasality in the liaison in words like bon, divin, ancien. Here we have examples of this from Faust by Gounod, J'ai bon espoir, where we have the liaison and the O is opened. And from Depuis le jour by Charpentier, Je suis heureuse, trop heureuse, where that closed O from trop becomes an open O because of the liaison. Now, this being said, not all nasal vowels will lose the nasality. There's words like here we have rien and bien that will retain the nasal vowel, but still have a liaison. From Roméo et Juliette by Gounod, Ah, je n'ai rien entendu, where we have both a liaison and a nasal vowel happening at the same time.
Well, we also saw this earlier with ton image, where the normal ones, the mon, ton, any of the regular personal pronouns, or the personal possessive pronouns, they'll stay nasal too, right?
Yes, so in terms of statistically, most of the words that you'll have with a nasal vowel will actually keep that nasality, and it's only a few that will lose it. Now, another thing that's very important to note about liaison is that it should always be light and elegant, almost like a more delicate version of the full-blown consonant. It's not zzz, but it's zzz. The purpose of liaison is to make the text sound more refined by linking vowel sounds together, but also by highlighting a refined understanding of the language. Because using a liaison implies that one knows that there are silent consonants involved in the spelling, and therefore has a refined grasp of the spelling of these words.
Yeah, I had one friend explain it to me that the liaison really is the connection. It's not part of the words. It's the connection between the words. So it's not as important as the words themselves.
That's correct. And as a result, the kind of consonant that you use is not as strong as one you would use in the middle of a word.
There are, if not hard and fast rules, at least a few guidelines that we can follow to develop our bon goût.
Yes, I think maybe the most useful one, the most practical one, is that liaison tend to happen when two words are closely related grammatically. If the words are not related grammatically, for instance, if they're part of two different clauses, you will probably not make the liaison. But if they are related grammatically strongly, then the liaison is likely to occur.
So how about if I say the rule and you say the example?
Yes, we can go through some of the broad rules, with the caveat that there are many more fine points to this. But these are some of the bigger ideas to remember about liaison.
Liaison will generally happen after articles, nouns, and adjectives in the plural.
So here we have from Spleen, from Ariad's Oubliées, les roses étaient toutes rouges et les lierres étaient tout noirs. From En fermant les yeux, from Manon by Massenet, sous ces tranquilles ombrages, les clairs et joyeux ruisseaux.
And we saw in the first one, it was subject verb, the roses étaient. But in En fermant les yeux, we have the adjective to its object.
Exactly. So it's as long as we're dealing with words in the plural, it's very likely that you'll have a liaison between them.
Exactly. Between an article or an adjective and the word that they qualify, even in the singular. But I want to point out and say, we're talking about articles and adjectives.
So from Soupir by Duparc, mais d'un amour toujours plus tendre, between article and noun. And here from Connais-tu le pays by Thomas, à l'ombre d'un grand arbre.
And here we really hear that D turning into a T, a soft T.
Yes, it's not grand arbre, it's grand arbre.
Between a verb and its predicate, preposition, modifier, and adverb. Again, even in the singular. And I'm going to again say verbs, singular and plural verbs.
All right, so from the Jewel Song by Gounod, ah, s'il était ici, s'il me voyait ainsi. From the Card Aria by Bizet, dans le livre d'en haut, si ta page est heureuse.
And the other thing to point out here is the aspirate H in the word ou, because this word also comes up a lot.
Yes, O is an aspirate H, so you do not make the liaison with the word that precedes. It's not dans nos, it's dans haut. And lastly, from the Sérénade Italienne by Chausson, partons en barque sur la mer.
Liaison will also happen in compound verb forms.
This is from Villanelle by Berlioz. Nous irons écouter les merles siffler.
After a verb in the infinitive that ends in ER.
Yes, from L'Invitation au voyage by Duparc. Aimer à loisir, aimer et mourir. We hear that R being pronounced after aimer both times.
After conjunctions, adverbs, and prepositions, except for the word for and.
Mais encore toujours les lui tendre. From Soupir by Duparc. And depuis hier, je cherche en vain mon maître. From Que fais-tu, Blanche Tourterelle by Gounod.
And now we have some cases of forbidden liaison. And this is the reason that I kept saying verbs and adjectives in the singular, because we cannot make a liaison after a noun in the singular.
Yes, that's probably the most important one in terms of forbidden liaison. Just remember that. If you remember one thing, maybe that's the one. So here we have from Sur les lagunes by Berlioz, sur moi la nuit immense, and not la nuit immense. And it does not bother the French to have the two E sounds in a row. So don't feel like you have to add that T in there.
And is the E sound then a little bit longer, the lowercase I?
Yes, you can either approach it a little bit longer, or you can also just feel like you're sort of restating the vowel just slightly. La nuit immense, without really a separation, but it's sort of restated.
I was just going to say with no glottal.
With no glottal, absolutely. That's completely smooth throughout. And from Les Contes d'Hoffmann, son nez était tout noir de tabac. And again, we have the same vowel twice, the same vowel back to back, and that doesn't bother us. Now, there is, however, I must say, an exception. And it's an important one to know because it's a common phrase. Here, from Faites-lui mes aveux by Gounod, que mon cœur nuit et jour. So in the phrase nuit et jour, you actually will make the liaison from nuit, which is a singular noun. I know it should not be allowed, but in this context, we do it. It's a common one.
Well, and this gets to our next rule, because we can make a liaison into the word for and, E-T-E, but we cannot make a liaison after the conjunction E.
That's correct. Here we have from Péléas et Mélisande, il va mourir et il m'appelle, and not et il m'appelle.
As we've mentioned already, before words that start with an aspirate H, it's a forbidden liaison.
Yes, we've talked about this already a little bit. Here's the example we had earlier. L'échelonnement des, the H is aspirate, so you don't make the liaison. Not des, but des. And again, we have two open E in a row, but that doesn't matter.
Usually, we do not make a liaison before or after proper names.
Right, so here we have from Carmen, je suis Escamillo, and from Péléas et Mélisande, Golo est ici. And we don't make the liaison in both those cases. But of course, we can find exceptions. So here's one from Mandoline by Fauré, cette ci, c'est cette amante, where we do make the liaison in this case. But most of the time, remember that you don't when you have proper nouns involved.
Well, and it's funny because I know I've been asked several times about that. Je suis Escamillo, je suis Escamillo. It's a question that comes up often, so it's one to always think about how you introduce yourself.
Yeah, and I think maybe it's, if you say je suis Escamillo, it sounds like the name is actually Zescamillo. That could be a reason why we don't do that. I don't know.
Yeah, I've also heard it can sound super pretentious to say it that way.
Yes, that's true. Well, generally, if you overdo the liaison, you will tend to sound just a little bit sort of highfalutin.
Sometimes there can be many sounds in a row when it comes to liaison.
Yes, there's a great example in Chanson triste by Duparc. Dans tes yeux alors, je boirai tant de baisers et de tendresse. And this is when I decide to make all those Z liaison. And I know that some people will want to drop one or two just because they find like it's too many Z's. Personally, I think that if you keep those Z liaisons light, it actually adds a nice little buzz to the whole passage, and it's actually quite elegant. But if you overdo them, then it will become just a little bit heavy.
Yeah. Sometimes, even in spite of a comma, if the words are still connected grammatically, we can make the liaison.
Yes, you should not concern yourselves too much with commas. A good example is here from En sourdine by Fauré, qui vient à tes pieds. There's a comma after vient, but we still make the liaison. And I will also add that sometimes, even through a rest, we'll still make the liaison. The most famous example of this is from Je veux vivre by Romeo et Juliette, from Romeo et Juliette by Gounod, where at the beginning she sings one note at a time and there's rest in between all of them, but we still make the liaisons in this case. Longtemps encore.
Yeah, she also has mon Name, I think, a few times with rests in between them.
That's exactly right. And even if those words are separated, we still make the liaison in that case. Now, however, there is another example of this in Carmen and the Smuggler's Quintet, d'avoir les femmes avec soi, where through the quintet we repeat femmes avec soi a lot. But at the end, there's a big pause between femme, and then everybody comes back on avec soi without the liaison in that case. Now, we could spend a lot more time discussing liaison. It's a big and broad subject with a lot of rules. But I think these are sort of the most important aspects that we covered today.
And that's actually all the time we have, so we timed it perfectly. Thank you, Francois, for being here.
You're very welcome.
And thank you all so much for joining us here today for the Diction Police by the book. In the next lesson, we'll be talking about gourmet diction. That is, some of the very fine details of French lyric diction, like vocalic harmonization, foreign words, a little more about specific instances of liaison, as well as tying up any loose ends from the first 3 episodes. In the meantime, we had mentioned earlier that the numbers have their own rules of pronunciation, so make sure to check out our diction tip video on French numbers for more specifics on that. You can find it on our YouTube channel or at our Facebook page, where we also have weekly tongue twisters for singers and diction lessons. See you next time.